All right. Hey, Susan. Hey, everyone else who's going to join us later or watch the replays. Welcome to today's Level Up Together and We're Eating Monsters and Magical Sticks. And by being here, let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So, by being here, you're giving me the permission to record you. Hey, Randall. And it will be shared via YouTube on the Level 1 groups for anyone to watch who wants to watch the replays and catch up. I'm a Level 4 practitioner. I'm here as your host. And everyone's insights, perspectives, examples, all that stuff is so valuable in this group to help each other grow and learn. So, with that said, let's get started. All right, Randall, we are on page 104. Pain as a pattern. Chapter 9, patterns.
Okay, it'll take me a little bit to find it, but I
Yes.
should be.
All right,
Page.
Susan, did you want to start reading?
Yes. Pain as
Awesome.
a pattern. Physiological pain is more than pain. It too is a pattern. The individual suffering pain from illness or injury responds to that pain in a patterned way. The pattern is based on their past experience with pain, their belief system as to their ability to deal with pain, as well as their future expectations. The individual whose past experience and belief system leads them to expect that they can handle it, that they've always done okay, and they know that they will recover quickly, becomes what is called a reducer. As the name implies, these individuals are able not only to minimize their response to pain, they are also able to actually lower their perception of the pain itself. At the other end of the scale is what is called an augmenter. An augmenter's belief system, and therefore their remembered history of pain, is that pain is terrible, awful, always gets worse, and they can't stand it. Their future expectation is that the pain will always get worse before it gets better. This pattern response of thinking leads to the patient who interprets twinges, the itching of healing, pressure, gas after surgery, etc., as signals of pain and as if by black magic or negative hypnosis, they actually experience more pain. Augmenters recover from illness or surgery more slowly, with more complications and more complaints than a reducer. To, to reason with an augmenter, or argue, or give up and walk away in disgust is to forget that their belief system and pattern of response is, in effect, operating as a hypnotic suggestion. Logic and reason have little or less to do with it. So keep on forgetting to use logic. Just as a pattern can be an effective and automatic response producing beneficial results, so too can a pattern be an effective and automatic method for self-defeat. If an individual combines a belief system such as I can't succeed, I always fail, with a pattern of behavior that leads to self-defeat, he not only fails, but the failure itself proves his belief system. This leads to reinforcement of the automatic pattern of belief and behavior. It is well known in scientific and academic communities that an individual can state a hypothesis and then find the data and statistics to prove the theory. A belief system leads to automating a response that leads to proving the belief system that leads to repetition of the pattern. It is almost like the proverbial snake eating its own tail and complaining about an imminent demise. G.A. Miller, E. Galanter, and K.H. Pribram plans and the Structure of Behavior, 1960, point out that habits and skills are plans that begin as voluntary processes, but in the process of repeating and overlearning become fixed and automatic. Wow.
That's cool.
That says a lot. Uh, a lot. Yes, that the augmenter, just that belief, oh, it's going to get worse, telling ourselves it's going to get worse, blah, 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 then it makes it so. We release those stress hormones, those instead of endorphins that make us feel better or being optimistic. Yeah, and then that snake eating its tail, it's what we our perception is what we look for. What we look for, we find, we prove, and rinse, repeat. And it's a cycle.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is powerful, right? Yeah. And we do it with so many things, with belief systems about food, belief systems about, pain or, all that stuff. And I also like this point in the end is that habits and skills are plans that begin as voluntary processes. So, it could be good habits or it could be bad habits. It could be just these belief systems, it's like we think about it and then we keep thinking about it, that it's going to hurt, and it gets worse and worse and worse. It becomes learning and repeating and stuff. It becomes habits. So, yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'll read the next section. Hypnosis patterns, Erickson. In the section on therapeutic applications, we will discuss in more details methods for interrupting self-defeating patterns of behavior. And we will help you to develop patterns for understanding and discovering patterns. For now, consider the results of sudden pattern interruption. Several years ago, researchers decided to interrupt hypnotic subjects as they were performing post-hypnotic tasks. They found something quite interesting. The subject, upon being interrupted, spontaneously entered into a hypnotic state. Milton Erickson utilized this phenomenon as a method of trance induction. For example, he would give a suggestion for some post-hypnotic activity to take place at the next session. Dr. Erickson would then interrupt the pattern. The subject not only entered into the hypnotic state, in many cases, the subject developed spontaneous amnesia for the events just preceding the trance state. If you, as a therapist, can discover a pattern in your patient and lead the patient to recreate it uninterrupted before completion, you may be surprised. You might find the individual entering into the hypnotic state. I may be wrong. You may not be surprised at all. Yeah, pretty interesting. So the sudden interruption, it's like all of a sudden you just interrupt it. So that would be something interesting to look more into. I like that. Yeah. Okay, case 7. Randall, would you like to read?
Sure. Excuse me. Pattern interruption. A woman entered my office, sat down, tightly crossed her legs, then crossed her arms over her chest, then let out a deep sigh and began spewing out words. The words were about her hopeless situation, her stupidity, her inability to do anything right, and that she would probably couldn't even learn this hypnotic stuff. At that point, my phone rang. Since I was expecting an important call, I had not turned it off. The woman looked upset, so I apologized and had her wait in the reception room while I completed the call. When I asked her back in, she sat in the same chair. Land recreated her initial behavior in every detail. Tightly crossed her legs, then her arms, deep sigh, and then a stream of words of helplessness. Recognizing her behavior as a probable pattern, I decided to interrupt. I said sharply, "Wait, I can't hear you from there. Would you mind moving to the other chair so I can hear you better?" She moved to the other chair, crossed her legs, then her arms, and sighed. But before she could spew, I turned to my desk and began writing without a glance at her. Next, I apologized and told her that the first chair would be better, and if she could help me by moving back. As she sat down, I told her to please cross her legs, only then her arms. As she complied, she developed what Dr. Erickson calls responsive attentiveness. Erickson, the best description of this might be staring in an almost dreaming way, daydreaming way. She was then told to close her eyes take a deep breath, and let it out slowly. Um, uh, i.e., her sigh described differently. Before we could talk, as she complied, already responding to my lead and suggestions, she was then told, "Now you're going to become so much more relaxed. You can continue breathing slowly, relaxing that much more, leaving it to her to figure out how much is that much more. And soon you may want to uncross just your arms or just your legs, first implying that there would be a second uncrossing without knowing when. Within 2 minutes, the most satisfactory state had been achieved. As you analyze the preceding example, you may grasp now the importance of the recognition and interruption and potential of patterns. It was a better than even bet that the woman's behavior was a patterned response in approaching any problem. Since she was in my office asking for help, it was also a good bet that her pattern was not working. Her pattern was first interrupted before she could into her words of despair, sent her to another chair. She was then interrupted again, this time before her sigh, sent her back to the first chair. Her pattern was again interrupted, and and directed, cross your legs and only then your arms, and further interrupted by injection of close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let it out slowly before we can talk. In summary, her pattern was interrupted, then redirected, and then redirected again into a formal hypnotic state.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
Anything you would like to share on that, Randall?
Well, I have a client that I work with and have for a long time, and she claims that she doesn't feel anything, but the first thing she does is she'll walk in through the door and she will just start to complain about everything, and until she gets really, really angry, and then all of a sudden she can access her other set of feelings about the rest of her life. Um, and it's to the point now she won't even she walks in the door and I greet everybody and she won't even say hi. She just sort of goes to the washroom, washes her hands, comes into the room, sits down, and then starts to complain about politics, local politics and stuff. It's interesting, and I've tried to break it, even just with a hello, welcome, and it's challenging.
Sounds just like this case.
It
You have to do
does,
a big interrupt.
yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, welcome.
Hello.
All right, we're reading Monsters and Magical Sticks. If you have the book, we are on page 107.
I don't have it.
It's okay, you can just listen.
Yeah, yes.
Yes, perfect. All right. All right, so next is instant pattern. Susan, would you like to read?
Sure. Instant pattern. Patterns, whether graceful and efficacious or painful and destructive, can be established rather rapidly. In his work on split brain, Gazzaniga discussed what he termed conditional reflex or bad habit, and the rapidity with which an individual can learn such patterns of behavior when he said, "We must remember that we are examining a half of the human brain, a system easily capable of learning from a single trial in a test," the split brain. At our training seminars, I will have a volunteer hold out either their right or left arm straight ahead, making a fist with their arm very, very stiff. I then tell them I'm going to give them an instruction that is impossible to carry out. I'm going to ask them to raise their arm up and move it down at the same time. Of course, it's impossible to go in two directions at the same time. I then state, "Begin," while they stare at me in disbelief. I say, "That's right. Now you can blink." I emphasize blink with my voice. At that moment in time, the person will blink. You could imagine that the brain is saying, "What is this craziness? I can't raise my arm up and move it down at the same time." But when they hear, "You can blink," the brain says, "Of course, I can do that." Now, the interesting thing is how quickly that suggestion is accepted. What is even more interesting is if You ask that person within a minute or two after their first trial to raise that arm and hold it up again. In most cases, he or she will automatically blink as he brings the arm up. In effect, the beginning of a pattern has been established in seconds. If they were to repeat this raising of the arm and blinking for 4, 5, 10 times in a day, they might develop what is called a conditioned reflex or a bad habit. If, as I believe, a conditioned response can be produced that quickly, imagine what happens when a person is raised hearing certain statements about limitations or having certain kinds of painful incidents happening over and over. If, in a matter of seconds, we can learn to put out our right arm and blink at the same time, what would happen to a child or an adult hearing something said over and over when it's connected with a demonstration of how they are supposed to behave? For example, consider the woman who sees her mother drunk all the time and whose father says, "You're just like your mother. Don't be that way." The child grows up and behaves just like her mother while protesting that she doesn't want to be that way, carrying out both ends of the suggestion. The combination of internal belief systems brought about by traumas, suggestions, or what have you, and the repetition of patterns of behavior that reinforce belief systems simply results in an individual who is stuck and without choice. They must look not at what the world is doing to them, but rather what they are doing within the world based on what belief system and what patterns. Since a form of hypnosis has been used to convince them that things exist which do not exist, or that things do not exist which do exist, it would seem to me that a hair of the dog might be the best course of action. In short, if a person really believed they could be successful, they wouldn't need you to tell them. Of course you can be successful. It seems ridiculous that somebody becomes, let us say, a psychiatrist or a psychologist with years and years of schooling and spends time telling a patient something obvious, such as, of course you can be successful. There are opportunities in this world. So the real problem is how to interrupt the pattern of behavior that continues to reinforce the belief system and how to help the patient examine their own belief system to help them acknowledge other choices that are available in the world. While we will specifically with the application of these principles later in this book, a selected case will help you to tie together what you have learned thus far. If you find yourself still tied to the past, this case will help you cut that cord right at the knot yesterday. At the knot yesterday, but now. Play on words.
Anything you would like to share about that, Susan?
It's just reaffirming what Robert says, with our the lower model, what we're told, everyone's doing it to us, and how we internalize that, and then it becomes truth. That's our lens that we're looking at the world through. And then this is talking about reversing that hypnosis state, showing,
Yeah.
Logically we know there are opportunities, but I can't, no. So flipping that, changing that, it's, yeah, very
We've been
interesting.
told over and over. Yeah, absolutely. Because
Right.
yeah, it's just we just go into that trance because we've been told over and over again that we can't succeed. So it's just a trance that we are in. And so as we break that trance, change those memories, create a new trance for ourselves, and then look at the world with a different colored glasses, different perspective, different perception. Yeah, I like it too. And I also like this statement, you must not look at what the world is doing to them, but rather what they're doing within the world based on what belief system and what patterns. Yeah. Any other insights? Any other? Feel free to share anything you would like to share, and um, anything you would like to, any insights, any examples that pop up. Okay. So okay, I'll read the next section, patterns, belief systems, case study. I was asked to see a man who was suffering with intractable pain resulting from cancer that had metastasized throughout his skeletal system. Other than his name, age, and diagnosis, the only other information I had was the pain had become so severe that he was talking about suicide. Medication was becoming less and less effective. He was willing to see a hypnotist, but he doubted that hypnosis or anything would help. Based on this information, I reasoned that asking him to relax in order to become hypnotized or attempt to teach him to control his pain at the start or to explain theory to him would be the height of illogical therapy. I agreed to see the man, providing that everyone concerned except the patient would be aware of and accept that I would use unexpected and unorthodox methods. When I arrived at his home, I was taken immediately to his den, where I found him standing up, hunched over, and evidencing great pain. His face was contorted, his body twisted and emaciated. As I walked towards him, his physician said, "This is Dr. Heller, the hypnotist I told you about." With a feeble and apparently painful movement, he put his hand out to shake mine. I pushed his hand to the side with the heel of my right hand, and I hit him on the forehead with enough force to jar him. He stared at me with shock and disbelief on his face and said, "What did you do that for?" Using a harsh tone of voice, I said, "Shut up unless I asked you." Leaving what I might ask unspoken. At this point, he was standing up almost straight, and his look of disbelief and shock was even more apparent. I went on in the same tone and said, "I am now going to stomp on top of your foot and break all the little bones." He said in a pleading voice, "Please don't hurt me." I replied harshly, "I have to hurt you." And with that, I raised my right foot over his left. His voice, which was no longer weak, said, "Don't." I replied even more harshly, "Shut your eyes, take a deep breath, and relax. I can't hurt a man when his eyes are closed." He closed his eyes in one split second, took a deep breath, and slowly exhaled. As he exhaled, I began to talk softly. Um, Hold on. Wait. As he exhaled, I began to talk softly. His face relaxed and his body, and within a moment, he was not only comfortable, he had escaped me, but somehow he had entered into a profound hypnotic state. This was intense. Yeah. Yeah, right.
No such thing
First he
as
was,
permission or informed consent. I mean,
right. Interesting, huh?
I may beat you during our session.
Exactly. Yeah, that was very interesting. Hey,
Richard
Sasha,
Bandler, sorry,
Richard Ben.
Richard Bandler has a lot of stories of extreme weirdness for his success of sessions.
That is so funny. Yeah, that would be fun to read. Sasha, we are on page 110 in my book, chapter 9, patterns. And we just finished the section, patterns, belief systems, case study on page 109. So any other insights, any other fun stuff about this interesting case study?
So just like the woman that kept coming in, sitting down, crossing her arms and legs, there was a pattern. And so letting everybody else know what was going on first so they wouldn't come in and intervene. He interrupted the guys, he's twisted, he's in agony, he's in pain, and he does something shocking to grab his attention and threatens harm, which he doesn't. And so that's a pattern interrupt. And then going into that hypnotic state after, does a couple of different things to shock him. And then that going into this more calm, soothing voice from the shock to the directing him, that's that pattern interrupt from bad, good, collapse, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that was perfect. And so for me, what also like showed up is he knows he's not like going into the patient's trance of pain because he knows that the pain is a pattern. So he's just using anything that he like that sudden interruption. So just doing the opposite, you know? So like if you the patterns of pain, and he's using the soothing, that kind of supports that you are in pain, so I'm going to be soothing. So he's probably like doing something completely unexpected, and you know, this was very cool.
It's interesting
Yes.
that he transitioned from threat to relaxation unexpectedly and in the same sentence kind of thing. So he's expecting more direct thing, but what he's directed to do is the exact opposite of what he's expecting, which may be the in that he needed or wanted. Cor-
This was bold to
Yeah,
to know that he would just go into that relaxation.
a lot of guts. I'm not sure I could get away with that or would try that myself, but then again, I'm not him, so
Right. But you can think about how you can interrupt that lady that's your client or pattern.
yeah. Um,
Yeah. Also, I feel like to be able to do this, you need some kind of a rapport, some kind of a um I mean, I would say he was not perhaps in rapport with this guy with patients, this with this cancer guy, but he just used extreme measures. So yeah. All right, case explanation. Who would like to read?
I'm happy to read.
Thank you.
Case explanation. You might be wondering about the crazy behavior just described. Good question. I'm glad you asked. Since the man's present problem was intractable pain, I could assume that at least in his present situation, he was in his kinesthetic system. As stated earlier, you must go where your patient is. That is, meet them in their world. Therefore, I knew I would not only need to begin in some kinesthetic way, but in a manner that would supersede his kinesthetic reality. I also knew that his belief system included he had pain. It was getting worse. Nothing was going to help. Everything was going to, everything everyone was trying to make me feel better, but to no avail. I could further assume that he had patterned expectations about doctors, what they do, and how they act, as well as to his pain itself. The pain pattern would include putting all or most of his attention on the pain, expected, expecting to get it worse, becoming more anxious and depressed, feeling hopeless, and thereby increasing his pain perception. My behavior interrupted his patterns. His attention went from his pain to my crazy behavior. He stopped worrying about what he felt and began worrying about what I would do and what he would feel as a result. My behavior was a shade different from what he expected based on his belief about doctors. Everyone was trying to help him feel less pain, while I seemed to be hell-bent on causing him more. Since the human organism is designed to protect itself, the moment he was given the option to protect himself, shut your eyes and take a deep breath, etc., he took it. As soon as he closed his eyes, several of his past beliefs had changed or were changing. By closing his eyes, he could stop something from happening instead of believing he couldn't do anything to help himself. His belief system about his pain began to change. Once he closed his eyes and began to relax, his level of pain lowered, something he hadn't believed possible. He learned he could avoid more pain, which also taught him he could have less and he could control something to do with the pain. Most of his new discoveries were inferential. shut your eyes, etc., equaled you can do something to avoid more pain, my stomping on him. If you can feel less and avoid pain, you can control pain. Last but not least, when I said, shut up unless I ask, the response was not connected to what had asked. The words shut up and unless I ask implied he was to shut up and I would ask him something of him. As a result of this subtle approach, the patient not only subtle approach, that's funny. The patient not only became comfortable and discovered hope, he was also able to learn self-hypnosis, to change his kinesthetic pain to visualize pictures and to disassociate from his body. Shall I keep going?
If you want to share anything else about this, Randall?
It's just a great explanation of what we just witnessed going on and
Awesome.
with some insight.
It was good. Yes, definitely. Yeah, if you would like to read more,
Sure.
go for it.
Patterns practice. Now, I'm going to ask those of you who are people helpers to interrupt your patterns as well as the patterns of your client and patients. These exercises should help you expand your belief systems or merely change them. Pay attention to the body positions your clients' patients assume when they are discussing problems and compare that with their positions when they are discussing something pleasant. Next, when they get into problem areas, politely interrupt them and help them to assume the positions they use when they talk about pleasant things. They and you may find that they have trouble getting back to the problem. Ask a few patients to talk about their problems in one specific chair or to move from that chair for all other conversations. Observe the changes as they move from one chair to another. Next, when they discuss a problem, interrupt and have them describe a pleasant vacation or something they do as well. Ask another patient to laugh and smile as he discusses a problem and observes what happens. As for the therapist, switch chairs with your patient. Look away from a patient during problem talk and make eye contact during pleasant conversations. That's interesting. Cough repeatedly during problem talk, smile during pleasant talk, and nod your head. Positive affirmation, right? You may discover that your patient begins to understand on an unconscious level that feeling good and thinking pleasant thoughts gets your attention. Use non sequiturs. The patient, doctor, I've been very depressed. Speaking of baseball, what do you think? Who do you think will win the World Series? And while you're doing that, take several deep breaths before you close your eyes. Patient, I've been very depressed. Splendid. I'm glad you're getting it out of your way. By the way, where did you go for high school graduation? Begin to observe your way of relating to patients. How do you greet people? Vary it. What facial expressions do you rely on? Mix them up and practice new ones. Learn to use certain tonal and speed patterns when discussing pleasant topics. Then, when your patient is in a bad place, use your pleasant tonal pattern. Without your patient's conscious awareness, you interrupt their pain-producing pattern, and they will usually cheer right up. Remember, there's no such thing as hypnosis without trance, or patterns without blueprints, or maybe there is.
This is some interesting ideas of how to do the interruptions, huh? So I
Yeah.
was thinking about that client of yours when she shows up in the office.
Yeah. After the, third time where she just sort of comes in like a steam train and doesn't even say hello, I stopped asking her how she's doing. I want her to go to the exact same pattern. Don't have enough chairs in my room though. That's interesting.
Uh, there was the changing the physiology part, like uh have them assume the position they use when they talk about pleasant things.
Yeah, or when they're talking about something pleasant, and then have them switch it out
Right.
and
Yeah.
or switch ourselves up, which is
But
smart.
yeah. Yeah. There were some fun things here. And it was about like smile and laugh while you're talking about the bad stuff. Or, there was that, or cough while you're talking about the bad stuff and smile while you're talking the pleasant talk. I don't know. There were some interesting pattern interrupts here, and I would like to I'm gonna make a list of these and add them to my sessions as well. I think there's some fun things here.
I bet you Chat GPT could come up with a whole bunch of really good, a list of pattern interrupts.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. I was surprised how much Chat knew about FastREFT actually.
Seriously?
It's read the manuals
That's cool.
somehow. Yeah. It didn't
Yeah,
always
yeah.
give all the right answers. So, we were in level one, we were in a hotel with Robert, and that night we were all going off to meet at a restaurant for barbecue in Oklahoma or Guthrie. And he's like, okay, well, here's the exam. It's like 60, 70 questions. It's a very large, long exam. And he goes, I'll meet you at the restaurant in an hour. And there's no way to do this exam in an hour, let alone there was he didn't I was quite angry actually because I'm like working through this trying to get this done and I know there's no way I'm going to get this done and be able to meet for dinner and then all of a sudden half the class sort of stands up and walks out and it's like there's no way they could have finished this and like I know this stuff anyways well one of the guys who finished early he just basically asked the questions to ChatGPT and got most of the answers correct but not all. And,
Hmm.
Robert didn't say you can't do that. He didn't say anything really. In fact, when we got to the restaurant, I was like, it was impossible to finish this exam. He goes, I didn't say you had to finish it. He just, we'll go over that later. So that was a interesting experience. I was so
It is
mad.
interesting. But yeah, I'm gonna ask GPT about more pattern interrupts
I,
because there's so many people, there's so many, you know, different, yeah.
For sure. One of the best books on coaching I had found was basically I can't remember the title, but it's like all about the questions, and it's a book of how to ask better, deeper questions to get where you want to go.
Hmm, that sounds cool. Yeah, I would love to read that book.
Well, if you send me a text or a reminder, it'll get
Oh,
in my queue and I'll find it because it's
I
buried
will.
deep in a
Thank
bunch of
you.
books. But sure, happy to.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess, or whenever you find it, yeah, I'll send you a reminder. Thank you.
Yeah, that's
All
how I
right.
usually do it with my clients as well. It's like if I tell them about something they want and they say, "Yeah, I'd like that." It's like, "Great, send me a text." And half the people don't, so I don't have to work nearly as hard for those. And we know I sort of filter out those who really want it and those who don't.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great, great strategy for sure.
And I tell them that if
Um,
you want it, you're going to have to send it. Otherwise, I'll probably forget by the end of the day.
oh, absolutely. I know.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So, chapter 10, left meets right meets left. Who would like to read?
Can you hear me?
Masha, we can hear you very faintly.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Can
Can you hear me
you
better now?
perhaps, barely?
What about now?
That's better.
What? 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Yes.
So this is the two brains, right? Section?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If asked, most people would insist that they are rational and that they would respond to reality. I would ask of them, which reality? Within each of us, there resides at least two separate, distinct, different, and equal realities. One reality is that of the left hemisphere of the brain, and the other is that of the right hemisphere. Professor Betty Edwards conveys the general consensus of brain researchers that when she states that not only do the two hemispheres specialize, they also perceive reality in their own unique way, which I thought this was debunked. But anyways, the left hemisphere specializes in verbal skills, numbers, analytical thinking, and linear digital reasoning. The right hemisphere specializes in spatiality, visual imagery, imagination, color, rhythm, kinesthetic experience, and creativity. As Robert Onstein puts it, both the structure and function of these two half-brains in some part underline the two modes of consciousness which simultaneously coexist within each one of us. Although each hemisphere shares the potential for many functions, and both sides participate in most activities, in the normal person, the two hemispheres tend to specialize. When you see someone you already know, your left hemisphere recognizes each specific feature, example, the nose, mouth, eyes, etc. However, if only your left hemisphere were operating, you would not be able to recognize a whole. Your right hemisphere, which is spatial and conceptual ability, takes the specific pieces and makes a whole. Dr. Roger Sperry of the California Institute of Technology, along with his associate Joseph Bogan and Michael Gazzaniga, etc., have demonstrated this concept in the research with split brain patients, epileptics, in which the corpus callosum, the arch bridge of nervous tissue that connects the two cerebral hemispheres and allows communication between the right and left side of the brain, has been surgically cut. I had thought like new research had said that that wasn't like the case, that the brain operates kind of like as a whole, and that the whole specialized left and right brain thing wasn't like a thing anymore. But I could be wrong. I mean, I haven't studied enough to really know.
It's possible. This book was written in, where was it? Yeah. So tell me more about that, Sasha. This was 1987, the book.
Okay. Which part?
Oh, that the brain operating as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they're still kind of discovering what each thing does in the brain and how it, relates to another. So it's still like ongoing research. I can see the whole, I mean, there are specialized areas in the brain, but I just thought that that particular thing where it's like it's divided is not, um, it's not consistent or applicable. But I think they do mention like in a normal brain. So I don't know, it's very ambiguous to me.
It's interesting. Yeah. That would be something to look into more and see what they're thinking. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's like areas that control like your emotions, and I know that some people have like suffer from brain injury and they stop having emotions altogether. So they don't experience fear, they don't experience joy, they're completely numb. So there are areas of the brain. I just thought this particular idea had been disproven.
Of it being having left and right hemispheres, etc.
Yeah, where it was like a meaningful, I guess you could say, the differences and stuff like that, where it wasn't psychologically meaningful anymore.
Oh, so interesting. Oh, thank you.
But don't quote me
I
on
haven't.
that.
No, that would be something interesting to look into because no, I have not heard about that. So that would be fun to
Yeah,
see what they're saying these days.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a chat GPT answer if that would be helpful.
Let's bring it.
Yes.
Chat GPT knows everything.
Well, that's certainly, sorry, not true, but and in fact, it likes to hallucinate. So that's why I say I could read this, but ultimately, it doesn't mean it's true.
It fills in the holes for sure.
Sure. It says,
Creatively.
yes, we still recognize that different sides or hemispheres of the human brain tend to be specialized for certain functions, but not as extremely or as rigidly as the old left brain versus right brain myth suggests. The current scientific understanding is hemispheric specialization is real but nuanced. Left hemispheres often involve more language, logic, mathematics, and analytical thinking in most right-handed people. Right hemispheres tend to play greater role in spatial awareness, facial recognition, music perception, and emotional processing. But the popular myth is outdated. The old idea that you're either a left brain logical person or a right brain creative person is not supported by neuroscience. Both hemispheres work together. The corpus callosum, which is the divide between the two sides of the brain, connects two sides, allowing constant communication. Even functions typically dominated by one side, like language in the left hemisphere, still involves support from the other side. I could go on, um, but yeah, so I think it's just a little more nuanced now, but there's still each part of the brain does process information a little differently.
It's very interesting. Cool. Thank you. All right. I would ask ChatGPT too and like read a little bit more. This is super interesting. Yeah, thanks, Sasha.
You're welcome. You might want to like include in the prompt or the question academic research only, so
Mm,
that it extracts that information from published works.
Excellent.
Because it
gotcha.
does make stuff up,
Yeah.
as I
Although
learned in grad school.
right.
Yeah.
Super interesting. All right. Who would like to read next?
I can read.
Sure.
Sperry, split brain research. In one of the now classical experiments by the Sperry group, split brain patients were given the task of assembling a jigsaw puzzle while they were in a situation that allowed only left hemisphere function. Films of these experiments show the patient struggling with the pieces and then failing to put the pieces where they belong. One film shows an even more provocative phenomenon. One subject was busy trying to find where the pieces went using his right hand, left hemisphere, and suddenly, without his left hemisphere awareness, he received help. The film shows his left hand, right hemisphere, sneaking into the picture and correcting the right hand until the experimenter forces the intruder away. It's interesting.
That's interesting. I wonder how that stands in the picture of the whole brain thing, but that also shows that, we use both parts of the brain equally, to create the whole picture. I don't know.
Right. Right. We have neuroplasticity. So if there's an injury, even with a surgery where they cut part of the brain, or if there's a massive stroke, like Norman Deutsch in his book talks about uh, I think it was, anyway, a gentleman had a massive stroke, his brain stem was damaged, and one of the gentlemen taught his father to walk again, going through the crawling and all of that. And Jill Bolte Taylor has a great book. I think she's a neuroscientist. She experienced a severe stroke, and her mother helped her recover full function after being totally disabled. So neuroplasticity is an amazing thing, even when parts of the brain get damaged. So
It's amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
So cool. All right. Hemispheric cycle. Anybody would like to read?
Sure.
Thanks.
I would
Thank
say there
you,
was a
Randall.
very interesting TED Talks about a woman who was all wired up during the time she started to have a stroke. It's quite well known, and so she described what she was experiencing as she was having it, and it was quite
Oh,
fascinating. Hemispheric
oh,
cycles. Psychologists at Dalhousie University have been investigating what is termed the 90-minute cycle of the brain. During their research, they've been able to verify a specific hemispheric pattern when left hemispheric activities are at their peak, right hemispheric activities are at their lowest ebb. Conversely, when the right hemispheric activities are at their peak, the left hemispheric activity is at its lowest ebb. Since different tasks require different hemispheric activity, we might wonder What would happen if one were to over rely on one hemisphere and underutilize the other, or rely on the wrong hemisphere for the task at hand? As you continue to wonder, the possible answers will become clear. In their book, The Evolving Brain, Brusen and Dixon demonstrated a historical trend in which Western societies have continued to place a greater emphasis on left brain hemispheric functions while tending to ignore and denigrate right hemispheric aspects. Western society has placed a greater emphasis on the scientific and analytical side of mental functioning than it has on the more colorful, imaginative side. They also built a strong case for united we stand, divided we fall, as to the relationship of hemispheric functions. Since different tasks and activities require different mental skills, it would stand to reason that both hemispheres are required if we are to move towards our unique potentials. Conversely, I believe that there is a direct correlation between over-reliance on left hemispheric and instability, suicide, and craziness. It's almost as if the right hemisphere, finding itself imprisoned, attempts to break out of jail in any way it knows how. The brain, it can love and hate together. It can be calculating and irrational at the same time. It can value trees and enjoy endless newsprint, which is destroying them. It has left and right hemispheres, which only appear to oppose when one is used at the expense of the other. For Bruce and Dixon, to reverse the trend towards the overutilization of one hemisphere at the expense of the other, I believe left must meet right, must meet left. In discussing brain split patterns, Ornstein drew a parallel between the results of a surgical disconnection of the hemispheres and the results of a so-called emotional disconnect when he stated, in this incident, a clear split was observed between the two independent consciousnesses that are normally in communication and collaboration. In such experiments with split brain patients, we can accurately localize the split of information in the different system. A similar process, although much more difficult to localize, may underlie the classic Freudian symptoms of repression and denial, both situations in which the verbal mechanism has no access to emotional information in other parts of the system. In less pathological incidences, when we perform an action intuitively, our words often make no sense, perhaps because the action has been initiated by a part of the brain little involved in language.
Yeah, interesting.
Shall I read the overview?
Sure, if you would like,
Or
yes.
when
Anybody has anything to share on this so far? Pretty straightforward, huh?
While brain hemispheric research has demonstrated that both hemispheres have raw potential of the other, in practicality, the right hemisphere has very little in the way of developed verbal skill. When certain stroke victims have been helped to speak again, through the right hemispheric training, they begin speaking at about a level of a 5-year-old. Therefore, while it's probably safe to assume that the left hemisphere speaks for us, it's not safe to assume that the right hemisphere does not communicate. On the contrary, the right hemisphere communicates in many ways, some delightful and graceful and others painful, dreams, fantasies, hunches, gut feelings, and kinesthetic memories, to name a few. All of the communication methods of the right hemisphere are important, but for the purposes of this work, we will focus on two forms of right hemispheric communications. First, there is mounting evidence that the right hemisphere, with its built-in ability to affect and mediate autonomic nervous system processes, is responsible for the information of so-called psychosomatic or psychogenic symptomology. And that these symptoms are a metaphoric communication of the right hemisphere. Secondly, in my opinion, we do not develop any behavior, no matter how bizarre, unless at some point in our history we come to believe at some level that the behavior was necessary to protect ourselves in the way we knew we best in the best way we knew at the time. Therefore, so-called irrational fears, anxieties, depressions, and messages are from our right hemispheric memory bank that we are entering into real or imagined danger zones. If, as many brain researchers contend, Western cultures are beginning to rely on overutilization of the left hemisphere, what are the possible consequences to the individual? Empirical observation and review might be very rewarding learning experience as well as the beginning of an answer. I would ask you to observe the people around you with special emphasis on the therapeutic situation. I believe you'll discover that those individuals who would fit into the so-called rigid compulsive or perfectionist category will evidence overutilization of left hemispheric skills, are logical to the extreme. Once you believe a turtle or is a horse, you may very logically attempt to saddle it and ride it. Are analytical about nearly everything. Try making love analytically by the numbers. Lack general spontaneity, tend to seriousness often without well-developed sense of humor, and tend to plan all activities in minute detail. These left hemispheric individuals will often be your typical ulcer, heart attack, alcoholic patient, as if their right hemisphere was trying to escape. On the other hand, you will discover that these individuals who fit under the categories of impulsive, hysterical conversation, acting out behavior, and even crazy are evidence almost total right hemispheric activity. It is as if they have given up trying to live with the narrow confines of the left hemisphere and have escaped into the fantasy world of right hemisphere. Some researchers have postulated that schizophrenia is merely the dream process acted out in reality. I'm not suggesting that all people will fit neatly into the above right hemisphere or left hemisphere categories. However, many will come close enough to give you pause for thought. The way an individual deals with a situation, either analytically, holistically, or a mixture of the two, apparently reflects the brain styles. Reliance on left brain strategies in all situations would characterize an extremely analytical person. A right brain person, in contrast, appears more emotional and rarely analyzes.
So interesting. Anything you would like to share on that, Randall?
I think it's interesting that I've read that the modern educational system that we have in our schools in North America are largely geared towards how women process information and less about men. And they indicate that ultimately it's why more women are in university and getting degrees, and less men are doing that now, and more men drop out of high school than females. And there's a suggestion that if you want to teach a male something, you need to enact a physical thing. So like a cross crawl reflex exercise, or putting them going. If you want to teach a young male something, take them for a walk and talk about things as you're doing something physical. And it's suggested it's because males don't have as much electrical activity that crosses between the corpus callosum the way women do naturally. So the last thing I'd add to that is that, some of the most amazing speakers in the world typically will say the same thing several ways so that the meaning will be received by the portion of the audience that's right brain dominant versus left brain dominant. Or another way of putting it, some people are visual, some people are kinesthetic, and some people are auditory. And so if you use portions of those words in your speech, ultimately something will stick. it's something I observed about Robert is that he repeats the same concepts over and over again in a very short period of time, and some things I'll miss, and then other things absorb, and I catch it. And so I'm really appreciative of that because it allowed me to take very good notes.
That is such a cool observation. Definitely. And I like what you said about like how the best speakers, they repeat the information in different ways. Hmm, very interesting. Any other insights, Tom, Susan, Sasha?
Can't think of any right now.
Yeah, this was really good, certainly. Um, yeah. I'll have to think about it in light of the new research as Sasha was talking about, like how much of that is like relevant with that. But I do like how when people are like very left brained, they have like all these physical symptoms like ulcers, heart attack, or like as if their right hemisphere was trying to escape. So that was interesting. Yeah. All right, everyone, this was really good. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you guys next Monday.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Sasha.
Thank you.